stream now, just so you know. And then I'm going to share the slides here. So let's get to the on Zoom. Can you see the slide I'm sharing?
Yes.
Got it.
Got it. Excellent.
Yes, sir.
Well, let's get going, folks. So welcome everybody to the July 14th meeting for the North Texas Archaeological Society. My name is Jimmy Barrera. I'm the president of the society, and you know, it's a great day here, at least in DFW, because our temperatures have knocked down a little bit. We're all celebrating for, you know, not having 105 or 10 degrees right now. A little bit of recap. So it has been 2 months since our last society meeting. You know, last month we always skipped June for the Texas Archaeological Society Field School, where a lot of our members were. We had 59 or so. That's what we tallied up. 59 North Texas Archaeological Society members attended the annual field school in Kerrville. So that's a really good showing from our membership. Also, since our last monthly meeting, we had a North Texas Archaeological Society project at the Clovis field site, and that's in Mills County. And that is an ongoing project, so we will be returning. So, you know, keep your eyes and ears peeled when that opens back up, which I think will be later this summer, maybe September. And we'll resume excavations. So that's a great opportunity at the Clovis field site. So keep your ears peeled on that. And then there was the kids archaeology camp at the Dese Center in Weatherford. And Miss Jen Fricks headed up that for the North Texas Archaeological Society. We had a number of folks who were here that volunteered, and I'm sure on Zoom. And so, you know, thank you everybody. That's a great event. We've partnered with the Dese. And of course, you know, kids sign up for the archaeology camp immediately. So it's a great, you know, exposure for our society and educating the public at the same time. Next month, Dr. Alan Slade of the Texas Archaeological Research Laboratory, TARL, which is at UT Austin. Dr. Slade will be our guest speaker, and he'll be talking about the fairly well-known Texas Clovis fluted point survey. And so that's you know, an ongoing project and data collection that's been in Texas for decades now, 40 years or so. So Dr. Slade will update everybody on that, and that should be pretty exciting for our Paleoindian folks, and I'm excited about that one. New members since our last meeting. So everybody here who's listed is a new member to the society since our last meeting in May. And we want to welcome our new members. We continue to grow. You can see that our society is now up to 253 members. That's more members than we had at the end of last year. So, you know, we already have more members and we're still growing. So, you know, congratulations to everybody and welcome to all of our new members. And then for students, you know, we continue to advertise that we do offer free memberships for students. So, you know, spread the word. All they have to do is go to our scholarships webpage, and it's a very simple application process. And then we get a free membership. Donations or fundraising. So we've got a few fundraising initiatives that are going on. The hats and the business card rulers are here at the meeting in person, and we are requesting donations. So we're requesting $15 for the hat and $1 for the business card ruler. And then Mike Shannon, remember, who's here with us, made these scoops, which have, you know, been seen at Texas Archaeological Society field schools and other projects. And so Mike has made those and donated them to the society. And so we're requesting a $15 donation for a scoop. And so all of that is here if you're interested, and it's out in the lobby, and it's self-serve. So, and we'll try to, continue to bring this to meetings, as much as we can. So if you're joining us remotely and you have interest and you want to attend a future meeting for that, just keep that in mind. The TAS annual meeting, Texas Archaeological Society annual meeting. It's a big deal for us. We are co-hosts with the University of Texas at Tyler. So the North Texas Archaeological Society is co-hosting this. It'll be located in Tyler, and that is about 2 hours from Dallas-Fort Worth. And so this will also be the first Texas Archaeological Society annual meeting to be held in person in 3 years. So we anticipate that this will have a large turnout. So this will be a really good one to participate in. And it's also a joint meeting. So it's the Texas Archaeological Society annual meeting with the East Texas Archaeological Conference. So it's combined. And registration is open. So registration is open. So register now. And also for students, UT Tyler has offered 40 free, registrants if you're a student for the first 40. And I know those are already going. So if you have any interest, you go to the TAS website and you register. And if you're a student, that's how you get the free student membership. So I would get going on that. Those are going to probably go pretty quick. Scholarship. So, the North Texas Archaeological Society, we offer scholarships to all of the Texas Archaeological Society events, including the annual meeting. And our scholarship covers the registration fee and your membership in the Texas Archaeological Society. So if you're interested, apply, go to the North Texas scholarships webpage. And with that, I will hop off and I will turn this over to our guest speaker, Mr. Tim Roberts of Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. Mr. Tim. So that's on. I'll get your slides going here.
I've been told to remember to breathe, so we'll see if that works.
All right, I think you're in business.
All right,
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah. Dim the lights a little bit.
So I'm not sure how many of you may have been to Hueco Tanks in the past, but for some it'll be an introduction to Hueco Tanks, and for others maybe a little bit of a general review. But I'm fine.
Do this one. Excuse me.
Is that good for everybody? See the slides? Okay. All right, just to orient you where Hueco Tanks is, for those that don't already know, it's up here about 30 miles east of El Paso in the northern part of the Sonoran Desert, not Sonoran, Chihuahuan Desert. And that undoubtedly played a role as far as the importance of Hueco Tanks to those that visited or inhabited over the generations. And I'll get more into that. But anyway, basically it's the source of water. There's 4 hills or low mountains at Hueco Tanks, and that's what Hueco Tanks refers to is these mountains and the eroded basins within these mountains. I guess the oblique view might give a little more sense of its association to the low-lying desert. These are igneous intrusions that the molten lava came up into the surrounding limestone millions of years ago, and then the softer limestone eroded away, leaving these low mountains. But they're referred to as North Mountain, West Mountain, East Mountain, and East Spur. in the late 50s, early 60s, this large earthen dam was constructed between North Mountain and West Mountain, and that'll orient you perhaps if you've been out there before. But when it was privately owned at that time, there was this idea of having a ski lake right here in the center of the mountains, and having a needle hotel and restaurant on top of North Mountain, and another hotel on the south side of the Huecos. Anyway, it's very good that that didn't happen, but that was the big plan at the time. So, just to go back and orient you for this next slide. Historically, and probably prehistorically as well, there was a trail that came down through here between North Mountain and East Mountain, and out where the dam is now, and on towards the west. And in 1848 and 1849, during the California Gold Rush, a number of people passed through Hueco Tanks on their way to California. And so this was an illustration from, I believe that was 1849, when that was drawn. And I was going to read a description from that time just to kind of further orient you, and kind of, it gives you a hint at the vegetation that was there at the time. But anyway, it says, the path pointed to a mountain of rocks lying across our course. On near approach, the boulders grew to the view, and travelers wondered how they could be crossed when at half a mile of distance, they perceived an aperture in the rocky mass, the width of an ordinary door. It enlarged several feet in width when reached, and we entered it by a smooth path without apparent ascent. The boulders receded right and left, and we found ourselves in an enclosed park of 100 or more acres, containing elder, acacia, and other bushes, and grass abundant enough for our beasts. This plain was named Hueco Tanks. It's a pretty good description, but the plain isn't Hueco Tanks. Hueco Tanks again refers to the mountains and to the basins within those mountains that hold water over a period of time. Just as an aside, that same vegetation, or those same species, were pretty much that's what was present for about the past 9,400 years. Prior to that, when it was a little wetter and cooler, there were also piñons in the wooded areas around Hueco Tanks. And it was the water that attracted people to Hueco Tanks. It's the only source of water for some miles in that area, in an otherwise arid landscape. So following rains during the monsoon season, some of these, the larger tanks, and especially those that are protected from evaporation, will hold water for most of the year round. Just another view of some of the Huecos there. On your way. No. This is a basin that is in a small cave there at Hueco Tanks. The cave is referred to as Comanche Cave, and this the basin is under this rock here, and it's one of the protected large basins, so it'll hold water through most of the year if you get a decent monsoon season. But I de-stretched the rock here. It says, by the way, it says water here, W-A-T-T-E-R-H-E-A-R. Spelling isn't quite correct, perhaps, but I guess I got the idea across. And when I de-stretched this, there was this date of 1850, and this reddish paint overlaps just a little bit of the lower part of that age. So water here was actually painted sometime before this red paint in 1850. So I think it was probably painted by some of the first people that passed through during the gold rush headed to the west. That was kind of interesting. I spent a lot of time dealing with removing modern graffiti from Hueco Tanks, but some of the historic graffiti actually is interesting. There's a small dam that holds this water now, but in prehistoric times, there was probably an area or two around Hueco Tanks that were wetland areas. So they would have held water at times as well. Now to get to the cultural resources, this is a map that shows, in blue, shows the archaeology deposits on the site, and the red dots are the rock art panels on the site. The entire property, this is all part of Hueco Tanks State Park and Historic Site, which is about an 860 acre property. And there's one trinomial state archaeological site trinomial for the whole property, 41 EP2. But in 1999 and 2000, the flat areas around the mountains were surveyed, and they were able to identify 29 archaeological localities and split it up a little bit that way. And there are currently 304 known rock art panels on the property. It's a National Register site. It's also an official state antiquities landmark. And early last year, it was also designated a national, I say National Historic Landmark already. It was designated a National Historic Landmark, and it was already on the National Register, in case I already mentioned that. The cultural periods, it includes everything from the Folsom period about 11,000 years ago through the historic period. So every cultural period in the region is represented at Hueco Tanks at the one side. The photo on the right, there's some thought that these smooth rock surfaces are mammoth rubs. So I wanted to go ahead and put some of those in the PowerPoint as well. But we haven't found anything yet where the mammoth and the cultural material are connected with each other. Another one of these smooth surfaces. I'm not sure that they all are mammoth rubs. Maybe some of them are, but some of them are positioned in such a way that I think there's some wind and sand abrasion going on in some of these places. But I don't want to rain on anybody's parade that thinks they're mammoth rubs. We have the early archaic represented at Hueco Tanks as well. The Folsom material through the Middle Archaic are presented by temporally diagnostic artifacts and perhaps some other artifacts on the site, but we haven't found any cultural features yet that extend to these early periods of time. We don't get anything dated as far as cultural features until late Archaic. We do have some groundstone features though that potentially could date to some of these earlier periods. We just don't have any. We don't know what the dates are for these feature types. We have bedrock mortars, cupules, and we also have some bedrock metates there at Hueco Tanks. There's a number of these features scattered around the site. The earliest rock imagery potentially dates to the early Archaic. There is at least one researcher that believes that some of the abstract imagery may date to the early Archaic. So I put that 8,000 year ago date, but I would take that with a grain of salt. That's just the beginning of the early Archaic there. I don't think, even if any of these are archaic, that they extend back that far. I would say, maybe several thousands of years old, but I think far less than 8,000. And this is the Chihuahuan polychrome abstract style or early archaic style. And I think there was, at least at one time, there was kind of a general feeling that a lot of the abstract imagery was among the earliest imagery at Hueco Tanks. But I think we've discovered more recently that some of this abstract imagery may actually date to the formative period and is associated with the Jornada Mogollon. And actually the Mescalero Apache in the historic period continued to use some abstract imagery. So I think we were maybe we were simplifying things a little bit for ourselves to suggest that the abstract was all old. Just another example of some abstract imagery there. Most of the imagery at Hueco Tanks is in the form of pictographs, painted images, but there are a few petroglyphs that are carved or etched into the rock. These I just discovered probably a couple months ago, and they're pretty basic. They're just some curvilinear lines, some other things that were going on in here, but not readily definable. Another one, a bad photograph, but there's some thought that this might be some sort of a seasonal calendar because that shadow kind of follows at certain increments, certain times during the year. These are pretty hard to see, but they're kind of V-shaped or shaped like an 8 roughly. And then there's some things often described as roadrunner tracks. Middle Archaic, again, represented by artifacts at this point, no cultural features that date to this time period that we're aware of. The next pictograph style is referred to as the Middle and Late Archaic red monochrome. And some of these images I've enhanced. You can see them pretty well out on the site, but on a slide, you lose some of the detail. So I've enhanced some of them with D-stretch. But we start to get hunting scenes and these rectangular shaped quadrupeds, kind of a trapezoidal anthropomorphic body there. These I enhanced as black and white figures. On site, these are a red figure, and these are pale yellow, really hard to see out on site. I should say too at this point that in the early 90s, some of the first attempts to date pictographs were made at Hueco Tanks. Most of the imagery was black imagery that they dated at the time, so probably some carbon in those particular images. But it's carbon or the organic binders in the paint that they're dating. So in some cases, the binder has oxidized entirely and there's nothing left to date. But they had some success, and we've had a lot more success since that time. More figures from that time period. More recently, in the last couple years, we've excavated a 10% sample of the approximately 200 known burned rock features at Hueco Tanks. These features are all in jeopardy of eroding away and that data being lost. So we've gone in and done some excavations. We've attempted to throw some seed balls out with native seed to try to reestablish some vegetation, hold these things in place, but it all depends on the amount of rain that you get and the timing. And the next drought, the new grasses are gone again. So we decided to go ahead and excavate a 10% sample. So we've excavated 20 of these and dated them. They've all come back as late archaic, formative, and a couple of historic period hearth features. And that's that project is being written up by one of our survey team members who's doing it as a graduate project. So it's not that information isn't out yet. It will be soon, I hope. Some of the points that have been found on the site. Beginning in the very late archaic and formative period, things really start to develop at Hueco Tanks. That's when it sees its largest population, especially during the Doña phase there. There was a hamlet, pit house hamlet that was excavated in the early 70s that dated to that phase. And based on the pottery types and the frequency of those types, it looks like a lot of the activity, including a lot of the pictographs, the formative pictographs were painted during that time. Of course, you get the shift from the atlatl technology, the dart points, to bow and arrow technology with the arrow points. These are all arrow points discovered at Hueco Tanks, including a couple of obsidian points. Get a variety of pottery, a lot of local El Paso pottery, but a lot of trade wares from New Mexico and Pacame area of Mexico. Of course, agriculture brought about big changes. It allowed for some population growth there, the need for storage features. Also, there were changes in terms of the pottery, the size and frequency of storage vessels for storing corn, and for also changes in cooking technology. One of the things I was seeing in El Paso Brown, which is not the most attractive pottery, but it's a plainware. But you could see the change in the size and the abundance of temper over time in those vessels, and so it was kind of interesting. It tracked along with when agriculture, when maize was coming into the area and onto the site. This is that hamlet that was excavated in the early 70s. And one of the things about this site is they had these 2-room pueblos, basically. It was the kind of the go-between feature, residential feature between the pit houses and the larger later pueblo features. And it's one of the few sites where they've uncovered those 2-room residential features. These are some of the pictographs attributed to the Jornada style that would have been painted during that time. You get various animal forms. This is thought to be kind of a pottery design. At least shaman feature or figure. This is a panel before and after enhancement, but it shows several different motifs. There's one of over 200 mask motifs on the site. The largest number of painted mask figures in North America is there at Hueco Tanks. What we refer to as a rain altar. Another quadruped. There's a turtle figure and probably part of a blanket design, geometric pattern. And a lot of the figures from that time period, a lot of the pictographs are related to water in one way or another. The rain altar, the turtle, the masks are thought to be precursors to the katsina belief system, and katsinas have the ability to control weather, the rain, and so on. And I'll be showing some other figures that represent different Mesoamerican deities that have associations with storms and rain. Some more figures from Hueco Tanks, another blanket design over an earlier middle and late Archaic red monochrome figure. That one's maybe a little hard to see, but probably a bighorn sheep. And then a couple anthropomorphic figures enhanced. That one's got, I don't know if you can see it from out there, it's got an interesting eye. Some more water-related figures with the dragonflies. Then we get these goggle-eyed figures or claw-eyed figures. Can never say that, but anyway, we'll stick with goggle-eyed figure. But very similar to the Mesoamerican deity, but kind of a localized version. And that was a Mesoamerican storm deity. Also the feathered and horned serpent figures that we get out in the Jornada Mogollon area have an association, or seemingly anyway, an association with the Quetzalcoatl deity in Mesoamerica. That's also a storm deity, wind, rain. These, incidentally, I should point out, I didn't have any good images of horned or feathered serpents from Hueco Tanks, so these are from the broader Jornada Mogollon region. But what we do have at Hueco Tanks are these couple macaw images, and those are animals that are said to be, that represent that previous deity, Quetzalcoatl. One thing that I kind of discovered more recently when I was writing the National Historic Landmark nomination for Hueco Tanks, I started looking more at the mask figures themselves, because you hear about the mask, but you don't hear about any sort of necessarily a Mesoamerican association with the masks. But this one here is Olmec, and this is you know, a somewhat a feline figure anyway, feline mask. at Hueco Tanks. This is a mask associated with the Mezcala culture in the northwest part of Mesoamerica. And this is one that we have at Hueco Tanks. There's an unenhanced image of this there, but it's really difficult to see. I don't know if you can see that at all, but has these interesting appendages on the head of the mask. And then this is also another Mezcala mask, and you can kind of see the single eye in the center of, or well, I call it an eye. Who knows? But anyway, it seems to show some similarity with this one. You've got this line across the top here, or groove. And you've got that space on the mask there at Hueco Tanks. And interesting, the Mezcala culture, if I'm pronouncing that right, kind of faded about AD 650, and Pacame or Casas Grandes and the interaction sphere, that came into being about that same time, AD 650, and the Jornada Mogollon up here at Hueco Tanks about that same time period. I don't know exactly what that means, but it seems like there's a move from south to north, and the Hopi migration story and their katsina belief system, they say that they came from further south, Mesoamerica, and moved up to their current area by way of some of these sites in between. And so I kind of wonder if you're not seeing some of the earliest evidence of katsina figures and belief system there with the Mezcala, and then up into Hueco Tanks and beyond. It's just a thought anyway. It needs more investigation. Here's some more mask figures on the left from Hueco Tanks, and of course the more modern day katsinas. I got a little heavy on the mask, but there's over 200 of them out there. So, and we have two different styles of masks. Basically, the solid figures, let's see, like these more solidly painted masks, and then we have ones that are more outlined masks. And a lot of these are painted in natural hollows, crevices, shelters, because those were considered kind of gateways to the underworld. And so these were painted probably to in prayers for rain or petitioning for rain. And so it made sense, I guess, to paint these in those places, those doorways to the underworld, to communicate with those deities. You can see it even in these little hollows in the rock. And this is one of the more recently defined abstract styles. And I'm still kind of struggling with defining or identifying this imagery versus some of the other earlier imagery. But it's referred to as Jornada abstract style. And a lot of these connected diamond shapes or triangular shapes are supposed to be representative of that style. And also they tend to occur in areas where there's a native tobacco that grows that's mildly hallucinogenic. So it seems there's some thought that there's an association with that. And also there's Jornada Mogollon pottery found in these areas. So it's thought that it's attributed to the Jornada Mogollon people, but much more recent than those earlier abstract styles. Another view with the connected diamond-shaped patterns. And we've got also historic imagery at Hueco Tanks. There's 5 tribes that are known to be associated with Hueco Tanks. These 5 tribes. There's some thought that maybe there are additional tribes that could be affiliated as well. We need to do an ethnographic study and see what comes of that. But I kind of wonder about the Hopi, for one, perhaps having a possible association. This is one of the historic images at Hueco Tanks. People generally refer to it as the puking horse, but I don't think it's a puking horse. It's you get these figures out on the plains, and they're stylized bridles. And so I think we have perhaps a plains group that painted this onto the rock, and that would be a stylized bridle rather than a puking horse. There's a rock art style in the plains biographic, and I think again we have plains groups coming out to Hueco Tanks and placing some of this imagery. So it may be that these are Kiowa or possibly Comanche, but I don't know for sure. Another group of historic pictographs at Hueco Tanks. This is one that they refer to as the Kiowa siege panel. There was a band of Kiowa in the late 1830s that were trapped in the rocks after raiding into Mexico. They were, I guess, followed by the Mexican military and trapped here. So the story goes anyway. And trapped for a number of days, and then they found refuge in a cave during that time, and there apparently was a tree growing up through a crevice in the cave, in the back of the cave, and eventually they, under the cover of night, they were able to climb that tree and escape. I think one was shot and presumed to be dead by the rest of the band. He later recovered though, with some help, and made his way back to Oklahoma. But anyway, I don't tell the story nearly as well as the Kiowa themselves. So, but I think the tree is outside this image, I guess. But there's over here, there's something that looks like a juniper or a pine tree that's been painted on the rock. Unfortunately, in the early 70s. Somebody had placed graffiti down in the lower part of the panel, and at that time they didn't have any. I guess it was especially bad, and they didn't want to leave it for visitors to see. So at that time, the only real tool that they had was sandblasting. So they sandblasted the lower part of that panel, and of course that took the pictographs with it. These days, since about 12, 13 years now, I've been working with professional conservators that use portable lasers to remove the graffiti from on top of the pictographs. And so they can remove that graffiti now without damaging the underlying pictographs. And we also, in preparation for doing those things, we do non-invasive analyses, X-ray fluorescence, Raman spectroscopy, and Fourier infrared spectroscopy. And that information gives us, if we're lucky, it gives us our what the minerals, what minerals were used to create the paint, both the graffiti and the pictographs, and gives us information about the binders, and also the surrounding rock that hasn't been painted. And they use that information to calibrate the lasers, and also to recreate the pictograph and the graffiti on pieces of local rocks, so that they can test the lasers on that before doing the work on the real thing. Anyway, it's been pretty successful. We've been doing that since 2009. These are thought to be Mescalero Apache pictographs. Some more Mescalero figures. These are also the connected triangle images like this are also thought to be Mescalero. So yet another kind of abstract or geometric imagery that isn't as old as the Chihuahuan polychrome abstract. And then the use of dots like that are thought to be perhaps Apache. So I just put this slide in to make sure I covered the high points. But I think I covered that pretty much. So I might have made it in shorter time. Anyway, kind of a quick run through. Still getting used to the speaking in front of actual people. So I might have spent through that, but anyway.
All right. Well, thank you, Tim. So I'm sure we've got some questions. Brett?
You know what mineral they used to obtain that green pigment in some of those pictographs? That's pretty unusual to see that. Right.
That blue green, we had it analyzed with non-invasive techniques, and all they could say is that there was copper content, and if they couldn't say, we kind of wondered if it was turquoise of one sort or another, but they couldn't say that for certain, just that it had some copper content. I'd really like to know the answer to that myself. There's 2 places at Hueco Tanks that have that color, but I don't see it for the most part.
Okay, and I'm going to try to remember when we get a question from the floor in here to repeat it, because it helps our folks on Zoom. And I apologize about that. Any other questions on the floor in here in the room? Skipper.
How many bighorn figures do you have there?
So the question was, how many bighorn figures do you have?
It would be an estimate on my part. I think I know about a half dozen figures. Actually, there might be a little bit more than that. It might be closer to about 10 that I know of. And they span that middle and late archaic red monochrome style and formative in that time frame. I don't know of any don't know of any later or earlier.
All right. Questions on the floor in here, ma'am?
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever ask like the tribes that may still exist in the area what they could be? Or
Can we
do you
repeat
just
that?
Research like good books and research papers and stuff.
Yeah, the question was whether or not I and others ever asked the Native American tribes what the meanings of some of these figures might be. And we have, and I also use existing ethnographies to try to gather some of that information. And you know, they're good about providing, you know, information that they're comfortable with providing, but there's some aspects that are kept pretty close, you know, to the tribe, because a lot of it is spiritual, religious in meaning, and so sometimes they hold that pretty close, and that's fine. But yeah, we use existing ethnographies and talk to the tribes and get what information we can. Sometimes we also try to extrapolate from groups that might be a little further afield, but you're gonna, I think, get something closer to the real meaning if you talk to tribes that have a closer relation geographically and historically to the site.
All right. Other questions in here? Royce?
Where did the name originate from?
For Hueco Tanks?
Yes.
Hueco is Spanish for basin. So I believe it was the early Spanish in the area that applied that name. And I don't know at what point it got the redundant name of Hueco Tanks. I mean, it's because tanks kind of refer to basin features that hold water as well. Also, the spelling has kind of changed at times. On some maps, you'll see Hueco spelled W-A-C-O versus the Spanish spelling. But anyway, I think it was the early Spanish in the area that named it. So that would have come about in the 1600s, mid 1600s in the area.
All right. Any others here before we jump into our folks on Zoom?
So I didn't repeat that question.
Oh yeah. Well, we're gonna get some questions on Zoom. Ray, would you mind kind of moderating those for us that are coming in on chat?
Sure, Jimmy. We have Marilyn Guido with her hand up. Can I unmute her to ask?
Sure.
All right. Here we go. I'm gonna ask to unmute.
Thank you very much. I hope I can sneak in two questions for our guests. So I'm wondering if the spectroscopy has given you any clues as to the age of the macaw imagery, and also if there are any shell artifacts that have been found, and whereabouts the shell came from.
Yeah, the spectroscopy will give information about the ingredients of the paint, but it doesn't provide any date for the imagery. That comes through another process, and I've been fairly reluctant to have much of that done at Hueco Tanks or elsewhere in the region, just because it requires some amount of the paint to be removed to be able to date it, and especially if we don't know for sure which figures where the binder may have oxidized and not be able to provide a date. You know, if we're going to damage the pictographs, I want to be sure that there's something there to actually date, so we get some good information. But I'm real hesitant about doing that in the first place, just because on the parks we're supposed to be, you know, preserving those resources to the extent that we can. So, but anyway, it's a different process versus the spectroscopy.
I'm sorry, yes, may I follow up with that by asking if you've worked with Shumla or seen what they're doing in regard to dates?
Yeah, I work with Shumla over in the Lower Pecos region. But the dates that they've been getting, with one exception a couple years ago, they're getting off of sites on private land. There was a pictograph on Seminole Canyon State Park and Historic Site where there was a piece getting ready to flake off. And so they did remove that to date that piece. But yeah, they have somebody on their staff, and they have their own equipment for running those dates.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And
And
the
you have-
shell?
There have been shell artifacts found at Hueco Tanks. It was in the form of a necklace, I believe, beads that had kind of come apart, but were still in the general form of a necklace. And I don't really remember the history of that. That was before I came to this job 22 years ago. But there have definitely been shell artifacts found there.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
Can I ask about the new you've gone down the river now and you have more land. Are you investigating the pictographs down there yet?
Down the Rio Grande?
Yes, from going from El Paso down through south. You have more land. More land has been dedicated.
Yeah, I mean, there's rock imagery further downriver. As far as the work I do, I'm limited to working on the Parks and Wildlife properties. So
Okay.
that's where my experience is.
Do you still have people camp there?
At Hueco Tanks?
Yes.
We do when there's a camp host available. If there's not a camp host, they don't allow camping there. It's just to try to protect the rock imagery and avoid new graffiti on the property.
And that actually is another question we have in chat from Katrina Nuncio. So can Hueco Tanks be visited? And if so, what are the protocols? I know you kind of covered that, but just there was the question from Katrina.
Yeah, it can still be visited. North Mountain is open to visitors, and the rest of the site, you have to have a certified guide to guide you on those parts of the property. So North Mountain is open access. East and West Mountains and East Spur are by guided access. And I think at the moment, they allow 70 visitors on North Mountain at a time. And it's a little less limited as far as the certified guide areas, but you have to have a guide available to get into those places. They're talking a little bit about potentially raising that number in the future, but it'll still be somewhat limited.
Okay, thanks.
Do they still allow mountain climbing on the north side?
Yeah, they still do. We in 2016 we had a de-stretch survey done of all the climbing routes, known climbing routes, and the department ended up closing, I think roughly a couple of dozen routes because there was pigment found not on the climbing routes, but near enough that they went ahead and closed those routes.
All right. Next question we have from Bill Purdue. Bill, I see you also have your hand up. If I can unmute you if you would rather talk.
Yeah, it might be easier. What I'm looking for is with the number of lithics, and obviously when you show the slides, I saw some obsidian in there, what looked like some alabates and some other far-reaching types of things coming in. I wonder, has anybody done anything about the volume of specific types of lithics and the specific material to track any kind of a trade thing? How far away have they mean, obviously, if you found some shells, that's one thing, but has anybody done anything with trying to track the lithics and the volume and the quantity to maybe determine some kind of a trade route setup they have, maybe?
I don't believe that's been done at Hueco Tanks. A lot of that material though comes from Rio Grande gravels. And so it may be a little difficult, but I don't think anybody's really attempted it yet. As far as I know.
It sounds like a graduate school project for somebody working on a degree.
That would keep them busy.
Without a doubt.
All right. Any more questions on Zoom in the chat, Ray?
I'm not seeing any in the chat, and it doesn't look like we have any more hands raised at the moment.
I see Tim Dalby's hand. Tim.
Yeah, you showed that one panel where they sandblasted it. Did they draw, record, or photograph it before they sandblasted it?
Let's see. I know Forrest Kirkland back in the 30s illustrated some of that. I don't know how thorough that was necessarily, and there were some older photographs taken, but as far as any detailed line drawings to scale, I don't know that I don't think any of that was done.
I'll have to look in his book. I didn't remember seeing him in there. Do you happen to know if Galen Burgess ever finished up his write-up on Hueco Tanks?
What was the name?
Galen Burgess back in the 90s.
Maybe not, because I don't remember seeing that on my shelf.
Wow. He had a monster manuscript on that.
Was it a particular topic or?
He had excavated a bunch of sites. Those were in the DeGarmo days at Fort Bliss. And he had contracted with DeGarmo to dig a bunch of and excavate and report on a bunch of Hueco Tanks sites. And I don't know if he did a lot of sites. That was the problem. He did too much. He bit off more than he could chew. And I just wondered if he ever finished it.
Yeah, because the only excavation report that I'm aware of is that early 1970s pit house hamlet that was excavated.
Miles Miller or Galen, Ray Malden or Miles Miller may know about it then, if you know them.
Yeah, they would probably know. But
that'd be worth getting if you can get it, because he did a lot of work.
huh. Yeah, I don't even know what sites he would have excavated offhand.
Well, as you know, it's all one site, so I don't know which ones he did there, because there was a bunch, you know.
Yeah.
We'll put that on Tim's to do, and we'll look forward to your report back on that, Tim.
Yeah, hold your breath, buddy.
Yeah, I'll let you know.
Any more on Zoom in the comments?
Let me see here. Looks like, okay, I've got one more from Alan Dart that's asking about the rattlesnake petroglyph on the slide just before the macaw's slide, and is asking about that petroglyph being at the Pony Hill site near Deming, New Mexico.
Oh, yeah, that's from that site, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I guess he was just asking if it was from that one rather than at Hueco Tanks.
Yeah, no, those weren't from Hueco Tanks, but
Okay, thank you. I think that's, I believe that is the last question I'm seeing.
We've got a hand raised from Chris Lentz.
Okay, I see his hand there.
Yes, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. This may be a little long relationship, but I noticed that one of your photographs, the archaic, the one that had a lot of overprinting on it, and you had de-stretched, there was a quadruped you identified. Looked to me like it could have been a mountain goat, following up on Skipper's question. But that particular animal had L-shaped feet, and mountain goats don't have L-shaped feet at all. And there's some rock art studies of Costco Mountains in Southern California, which is on the western side of the Basin and Range province early on. in which they're finding those things. And those are actually shaman. If they have mountain goats with L-shaped feet are shaman.
Oh, that's interesting.
They're calling the mountain sheep down from the upper range, and it's related again to calling down rain. The people in Casco actually don't have mountain sheep bones in the sites. They have a lot of grinding materials, but they're picking up the seeds that are introduced after rainstorms. And so the goat with L-shaped feet are thought by David Whitley in some of his publications of Costco Mountains to be shaman that are associated with calling in rain.
Oh, well, that would make sense for Hueco Tanks. Thanks.
All right. Ray, are there any comments on YouTube Live, or is that not set up?
It says chat is disabled for this live stream on there. I thought we had it set up otherwise, but I'm not seeing any comments.
All right. Well, I apologize to our folks on YouTube Live. So back here in the room, any other questions on the floor here in the room? Yes, ma'am.
Just wondered if you wanted to elaborate a little bit on some of the things that are happening that can destroy rock art out there, some of the problems.
Oh, yeah, the question was, what sort of issues are we perhaps having at Hueco Tanks now that are possibly detrimental to the rock imagery out there? And we do have some things going on. I think one of the big issues at the moment, actually, even more so than graffiti, is the prevalence of aoudad out at Hueco Tanks these days. They're rubbing on the rock imagery, on the pictographs especially, and causing damage to the pictographs. Also, they're rooting around in the archaeology deposits, so causing damage to that as well. So we're trying to come up with a solution to remove the aoudad from the park, but it's probably going to involve trapping of some sort. I think the contract is perhaps being awarded in the near future for that. But anyway, it's a major problem, and of course they leave their little pellets everywhere for visitors to step on and so on. Anyway, so that's a big problem, and we still have a little bit of a problem with graffiti out there. Although since the public use plan was put into place in the late 1990s there at the park with the restricted number of visitors and so on, that's really helped the graffiti issue. We don't have too much of that during the last couple of years with COVID and getting visitors that wouldn't necessarily visit parks otherwise. They don't have kind of a proper stewardship mentality or whatever, and so we've had them place graffiti out there, but people have to sign in with their names and dates, and actually we've had pretty good success catching those that have left the graffiti. Of course, we still have to clean up the graffiti, but that's part of my job, so I'm perhaps getting a little bit better at that. It's an unfortunate thing to have to do, but anyway, and like I say, we have the ability now with the portable lasers to get out there and remove graffiti from on top of the rock imagery without harming the imagery. So, and I guess as far as the archaeology resources, we have some erosion issues out there. We're trying to do things to slow the erosion. That's a little bit more difficult actually. But anyway, there are some challenges as far as trying to preserve the resources. I think with the de-stretch survey of the climbing routes, I think the imagery is pretty well protected from the recreational activities out there at this point.
All right. Any other questions on the floor in here? Anybody? Last chance. Okay. Back to Zoom. Any other questions pop up on Zoom, Ray? We have a hand raised.
No, I didn't raise my hand.
This is Marilyn with the raised hand.
Okay, Marilyn, go ahead.
Thanks. So Tim, I remember that when I first lived in El Paso, TPWD had its own law enforcement individual that lived at the site. And then that stopped at some point, maybe 10 years ago. I wonder if that person, that job has been brought back. And
Yeah.
also, in regard to the portable lasers, does that mean that TPWD has their own laser and can do that work to remove the graffiti from the pictographs?
I'll answer that second question first. She was asking, well, I guess you all heard, whether Parks and Wildlife has their own laser to do that graffiti removal. And the answer to that is no. We work with a professional conservator to have that work done. Yeah, there's nobody on staff that has those particular skills or the equipment. So we work with a conservator on that. Also, as far as park peace officers, there is a park peace officer. He doesn't live on site at this point, but he has a regular schedule there at the park.
That's really good to hear. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, if no further questions, then I want to thank everybody for coming to our July meeting. And I look forward to seeing everybody next month in August. You know, keep your eyes and ears peeled for our events as they're coming up. We're going to have a lot of stuff moving into the latter part of 2022. So participate and have a great night. Be safe out there.